the Gemara that we learned on Friday, we learned two new little pieces. So let's just go over those two sections, two paragraphs, small paragraphs. The first one, the first point was about an esrog katan, a small esrog. The small esrog, the Mishnah had said that this same argument about the small esrog, what is the smallest size of an esrog, either a walnut or an egg. So the Gemara said that that's the same size as the small stones that they would use for a bathroom in the olden days before they had toilet paper. They would use avonim mukorzolos. Rashi translates these type of stones were stones that are either smooth or sharp. And Taisva says mukorzolos means that they were soft. Rakos, not exactly sure what that means, soft stones. But however you understand it, that was basically the stones that they would use. And the Gemara brings a brisa which talks about the laws of Shabbos and being able to use which stones, because according to halacha, according to law, the letter of the law, you're not allowed to move any stone on Shabbos. A stone is called muktzah, and in addition to muktzah, you have another problem, which is carrying it into a bathroom. If there's a sort of like a walled-in area, that would be considered a reshus hayachid, a private domain. And the way Tosfos understands it is that's what we're talking about here. And you're taking from a field to bring from a field the stones into that private domain, which would be considered a rabbinic prohibition, because you're bringing from what's called a karmelis, a sort of like a no man's land type of situation, into a private domain. That's a rabbinic prohibition on Shabbos, and Tosfos says that was permitted for kavod habriyos. Kavod habriyos is human dignity. That there's certain laws in the Torah, I shouldn't say in the Torah, certain rabbinic laws that are, or many rabbinic laws. There are rabbinic laws that are exempted that we permit, even though they're rabbinic prohibitions, but they're permitted for the purpose of kavod habriyos, for human dignity. And one of those laws has to do with using these stones on Shabbos that normally they'd be muktzah, normally you're not allowed to carry into from a karmelis to a reshus hayachid, from this type of a field into a private domain. But because of human dignity, it is permitted, and the rabbis relaxed their decree in such situations. So the brisa tells us that what is the measurement of these stones? Now, the way Rashi learns is that this is the maximum size that you're allowed to use stones for. In other words, if it's a large stone, it's going to be prohibited, even for kavod habriyos. The rabbis didn't relax their laws. They only relaxed the laws on stones that are usable for this purpose, and that has to be fit, and that means that they're small. And there's an argument, Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda, the size of those. And of course, in the olden days, this was very practical. In today's day and age, we don't consider it practical at all, unless you're maybe on a camping trip or something, and you're trying to live like they lived in the olden days. So maybe this law would be applicable then. But for the regular person today, it isn't practical. But nevertheless, this is the halacha, that there's an argument, Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, what the maximum size of these stones are. It turns out that the exact maximum size that we say here is the minimum size of an esrog. So here we're talking about a minimum size of an esrog, and either the walnut or the egg, and there that's the maximum size of these stones. Now, the commentaries struggle a little. I mean, why does the Gemara have to tell us this, that there's a similarity? Well, like, in what sense is it similar? in what do we need this for? And so I explained on Friday that it basically helps you remember that if you remember, the law here, because this is a Mishnah, so you'll probably remember the law here. So you'll be able to remember what the law is over there in Hilchos Shabbos, which is only a brisa, so you might forget that. And therefore, the Gemara connects the two so that now you will have a good symbol to remember. It'd be the same argument, basically. But the truth of the matter is, why are we more concerned here than other laws? And additionally, there's a big difference between these two laws. Here, at least the way Rashi learns, this is the minimum size of the esrog. There, in the laws of Shabbos, that's the maximum size of the stones. It's a little different. It's not exactly the same. So one of the commentaries, Aruch Laner, wants to say that really there's another way of learning. He says, if I could argue on Rashi, I'd like to say a different shot. And he'd like to say that the Gemara is really saying that specifically, don't learn that the brisa regarding the laws of Shabbos is talking about, don't think that it's talking about the maximum size there. That's really the minimum size. And that size and anything bigger is really okay. And how do you know that? Because we're comparing it to the esrog. By the esrog, this is the minimum size. So the Gemara is specifically comparing it so that you'll learn that that case over there is also about a minimum size. So in other words, it's going to help you explain the price. Not that we're afraid you're going to forget. It's that this is explaining that case over there, that both cases are talking about the minimum size. Again, this goes against Rashi had learned that that the laws of Shabbos, that's the maximum size. But the Aruch Laner says that it would seem like the Gemara would flow a lot better if you could learn this pshat. And basically, it comes out that our Gemara is giving a explanation or description of what the argument there is about, that it's also there, it's about the minimum size.
Rabbi.
It'll help you from making such a mistake. Yes, David.
Isn't it disrespectful to say that you're comparing the size of the esrog to something that you wipe yourself?
Well, I'm not sure. The Gemara does it. The Gemara compares it. I guess the fact is that it's human dignity. It's talking about making, enhancing human dignity. So it's important, maybe the avanim akorzolis.
Okay.
Okay, so that was the discussion about the comparison that the Gemara brings, and then comes the next little paragraph, and that was about the maximum size of an esrog. And the Mishnah had said, what is the maximum size of an esrog? And on the Mishnah, we did have the simple reading of the Mishnah. We also mentioned that there is another version of the Mishnah. The simple reading of the Mishnah was that the maximum size is that you should be able to hold 2 esrogim in one hand. That was Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. And Rabbi Yossi says, even if you hold 1 esrog in 2 hands is also fine. The other way of reading the Mishnah was that the maximum size is both of them. What was the other version? Kadesha yoiches shnehem biyodai achas. That you should be able to hold both the lulav and the esrog in one hand, not 2 esrogim, but it was the lulav and the esrog in one hand. If you remember, we mentioned that was the way Rabbi Yehuda seemed to understand it. So it fits better if with this version, because he explained that he's nervous that you're going to drop the esrog if you have to switch hands when you're switching the lulav and the esrog hands. So you need to be able to hold both in one hand, at least at one point, to be able to switch hands, to switch them back to the other hands. So that's how big the esrog, the maximum size, should be, that you could handle your lulav and your esrog in one hand. So in other words, not that you could hold 2 esrogim in one hand, but you should be able to hold the lulav and the esrog in one hand. And Rabbi Yossi says, even b'shtei yadav, even if you hold one in each hand, not that you could hold the esrog in two hands, but at least the esrog should be for your hand, right hand, your left hand, and your lulav in your right hand. So, according to this, the opinion of Rabbi Yossi would be, afilu b'shtei yadav, you should be able to hold the lulav and the esrog in two hands, which means each one in one hand. That would be the other way of learning. Again, the first way of learning was that Rabbi Yossi says even one esrog in two hands. That was Rabbi Yossi's way of learning. Even if you have the esrog in two hands, that's fine. The other way of learning is no. If you have the esrog is one hand, the lulav, it takes up your whole hand, and not like Rabbi Yehuda that you need to be able to hold the lulav and the esrog in one hand. He holds even the esrog can take up your whole hand. That's fine. Now the Gemara then brought a brisa. The brisa said, "Amar Rabbi Yossi." Rabbi Yossi wants to prove his point that you could have a big esrog. How does he prove his point? So he brings up in a brisa. He proves his point. What's his point? He proves it by saying that we have the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. We have the story of Rabbi Akiva. And the story of Rabbi Akiva is that he came to shul. And guess where he had his esrog? It was so big that he had it on his back, on his shoulders. Safely. He was carrying it on his shoulders. So, it shows that it must have been big. And Rabbi Yehuda, your view is a very limiting view. We see that Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva had a big esrog. He put it on his shoulder. And so the Gemara says back, the Brisa continues and says that Rabbi Yehuda answers him back. He says, Rabbi Yossi, you bring a raya, you bring a proof from Rabbi Akiva's story. That story of Rabbi Akiva, you missed out the second half of the story. The rabbis told Rabbi Akiva, they said, that's not Hadar, that's not beautiful. And it's puzzle, it's invalid. So Rabbi Yehuda comes along and tells us the end of the story that the rabbis have told Rabbi Akiva that an esrog that's too big is not Hadar. And seemingly he's saying it's not Hadar, it's invalid. Now Rashi is very bothered over here. Rashi has a little lengthy discussion here. And the reason he has a lengthy discussion is he's a little bothered with the fact that Rabbi Yehuda himself, if you remember the earlier Gemara said that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold of Hadar. He doesn't hold that an esrog needs to be beautiful. He learns from the other psukim, he learns it very literally, that the word Hadar means the different drushas, the different insights and expounding that we expounded, which you could have learned that it's more of what you would call an asmachta, those teachings, that it's more of a hint in the pasuk. He learns it very literally, that the word Hadar means Hadar bi'ilani mishana l'shana, it's Idur. He learns that it's literal, that it doesn't mean Hadar. It doesn't mean it's beautiful. It means another meaning, which we went through different interpretations. In Rabbi Yehuda, when he says his halacha that an esrog can't be too big, it's nothing to do with being Hadar beautiful. It has to do with the fact that he's afraid it's going to fall if you have to switch hands. That's what Rabbi Yehuda's nervous about. You're going to switch hands because you by mistake, you took the esrog in your right hand, you took your lulav in your left hand. What do you need to do? You got to switch hands. What's going to happen? You're going to put your lulav in your right hand, which is holding your esrog, and all of a sudden, the esrog is going to fall. Oh, the pitum broke off, and the ukitz might have broken off. The bottom, the top, they might have gotten damaged. So bottom line, Rabbi Yehuda is nervous about it falling. And therefore he says, don't get an esrog that's too big. Now, the reason, not because of Hadar. So how does Rabbi Yehuda in our brisa here, how does he go and tell a story and he makes a whole thing? He says, they told Rabbi Akiva that it's not Hadar. You don't even hold of Hadar, Rabbi Yehuda. you're bringing a proof or disproving Rabbi Yossi with this story, and you're talking about Hadar. The esrog is too big, and it's they told Rabbi Akiva that it's not Hadar. Well, how are you saying this if you yourself don't even hold of this Hadar thing? So the Gemara, so Rashi is bothered with this question, and he says that what Rabbi Yehuda was telling Rabbi Yossi is that the rabbis did hold of Hadar. I'm arguing. Rabbi Yehuda says I argue on all these rabbis. I hold that the law of esrog doesn't require Hadar. It doesn't require the special beauty. It requires that you're not allowed to have too big of an esrog. We're afraid it'll fall. It sounds like a rabbinic decree. So Rabbi Yehuda prohibits such a big esrog. But the rabbis hold of this concept of Hadar. So he's using their claim, and he says the story ended not like I hold, but for a different reason. But nevertheless, even according to you, you got to acknowledge that that reason applies. And what is that reason that I don't hold of but should affect you, Rabbi Yossi, should affect you? That reason is what the rabbis told Rabbi Akiva. That story, the rabbis had told Rabbi Akiva, they said that this is not appropriate to have such a big esrog. It's not Hadar. It's not beautiful. I don't hold of that problem. I hold a different problem, Rabbi Yehuda says. But for you, don't take proofs from Rabbi Akiva's story because the rabbis themselves argued and they claimed that that wasn't appropriate because it's not Hadar. So this is what Rabbi Yehuda is telling Rabbi Yossi, that you should hold of the concept of Hadar. I don't have this problem, but you have this problem. I have a different problem. But even according to you, you should be concerned about Hadar, and that's the way the Brisa explains. That's the way the continuation of the story, as explained in the Brisa, and the way Rabbi Yehuda tells it. He seems to bring a proof. He seems to want to bring a proof from himself. Now, from this story, from the end of the story. Now, the commentaries deal with this story as to when Rabbi Akiva was carrying this esrog on his back, on his shoulder. What exactly was he? Was he going to fulfill the mitzvah that way or not? So the understanding of the Hagois Yavitz is that he was not fulfilling the mitzvah that way. He was just carrying it that way. But to fulfill the mitzvah, you need to hold it in a way of covered honor, the way it grows. If it's in a bag, if it's in if it's on your shoulder and your clothing is separating, that's called a chatzitza. And it must be that he wasn't fulfilling his mitzvah that way. It was just the way he was carrying it, because it was heavy. He was carrying it in that manner, that method. Now, and you would need to hold it, the b'shas mitzvah, the time of the mitzvah. So basically, Yaakov Emden wants to explain the story that he was not expecting to fulfill the mitzvah that way. However, there is a Sefer Emek Sukkos that says that he brings from the Ran that he was fulfilling the mitzvah that way, and that your beged is not a interference. It's not a chatzitza. Chatzitza means interference, doesn't separate. And the main point is that you are misayeya, that you are helping with your hand, holding it. So you're holding the bag, you're holding however it's being, it's on your shoulder, your arm, you're basically helping, holding it. That is good enough, and that you don't need the majority of the esrog or in your hand. It's you could fulfill the mitzvah that way. We'll have to talk a little more about this when we learn about the eged, and we'll learn more about this in the next Mishnah and Gemara. So to be continued in that topic, we're going to start the next Mishnah. the Mishnah is on page 36b, and we are, I would say, pretty much in the middle.
Hello. Hello.
Bottom. 36b, about 20 lines up from the bottom, the Mishnah, Masnisim. The Mishnah says, Ein oigden es halulav. You don't tie the lulav, bind the lulav.
You froze, Rabbi.
See, right on into. I'm not telling you again. Okay, so. You can maybe. You can say 2 miles, I don't know.
Rabbi, you're frozen. Anybody else hear this?
I hear you saying.
Yes. Yeah, I hear you. But I don't see the rabbi anywhere.
It's below freezing in New York right now. So it's surprising that he's in Florida and it's frozen.
Is he in New York?
No, he's just
No, I think he's in Florida. I think he's in Florida.
Okay, sorry about
Aha. Now you're frozen again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Now we can
Okay.
actually see you too.
Now you could see me before you couldn't see me? Oh. Okay. So the Mishnah says, Ein oigden es halulav ella b'minoi. We can't bind the lulav only with its species of the minim, the species that are being used for the daled minim. Those are what you're allowed to use to bind the lulav, which basically means you could use, let's say you have an extra hadas, an extra myrtle, an extra willow, you have a leaf of a lulav, you could bind the lulav with the other 2 species with any of those, with those types, anything that it's the min. And there's a discussion in the commentaries if you would be allowed to use a branch of the esrog tree, because is the esrog tree it's not actually bound with these 3. So is it included in this ability to, is it from the daled minim or the gimel minim? Are you allowed to bind with the esrog branch? Let's say you take the bark from the esrog tree, and would you be able to bind with it? So that seems to be a debate among the later commentaries. But from the other 3 species, you could use any of those. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir says, Afilu b'chutz b'meshicha. Rabbi Meir says, even with a chutz, and it seems like there is a question as to the exact version here, if it's supposed to say b'chutz or just b'meshicha. But basically, chutz seems like a small type of thread, and mashicha means a thick rope, a thicker rope. So you have a chutz or a mashicha. Either of them, according to Reb Meir, are going to be kosher. You don't need to use one of the minim of the lulav and of the lulav. You don't need to use one of the 3 species or maybe the 4 species. You could use even one of these, even a rope, etc. And Rabbi Yehuda's concern was that if you use something else, it's going to be an isser of bal toisif. You're adding on to the mitzvah of the daled minim. And according to Rabbi Meir, it's not a problem. We'll soon see.
Amar Reb Meir says, Maisa, there's a story, Ba'anshe Yerushalayim, the people of Jerusalem. What was the story of the people of Jerusalem? So they would tie their lulav with strings of gold that were, it was hooks of, I should say hooks. They're like fisherman hooks that of gold. Now, I'm not saying they would fish with golden hooks, but the gimoinios is from the word egmine, which means some type of a fishing hook. So it probably looked in that shape, something like the shape of a fish hook, but the golden strand. And they would use that, the people of Yerushalayim would use that to tie their lulav. So Reb Meir seems to be proving to Reb Yehuda that you're allowed to use something that's not the min of the gimel or dalet minim. It's not the BC of that we're supposed to be shaking with, and yet nevertheless it's going to be kosher. And this is Reb Meir's source. Reb Meir, well, not a source, is proof that it's okay. The people of Yerushalayim would do that. They would use gold. So what do the rabbis answer him? Amru Loi, they said to him, B'minai hayu oidin oisai. Let me mute everyone here. Oh, sorry. Mute everyone. I don't know why I can't mute everyone. How come it's not letting me mute all? Okay. Sorry about that. So Reb Meir seems to bring a proof that it was okay to use other species like gold, and he has a story. In Amru Lai, the rabbi said to him, that's not a proof, because they already would be tying the lulav with the other hadassim and aravos. They would tie that below where the area on the bottom of the lulav, or lower, the bottom area of the lulav, they would tie it with milmata. They would tie it with one of the species, and then they would afterwards tie it with gold as in a sense of beauty and not for the mitzvah. Now, the famous question over here is, does that work, and does that get you out of the problem of Baal Tosef? Because the fact is, you're still adding a species to love. You tied it already, but you also have a gold as well being tied over there. So you got a gold. Now, one of the commentaries says that the gold brings the opinion that the gold was on top of the lower attached binding. So you had, let's say you bound it with lulav leaf, and then on top of the lulav leaf that you bound it with, then you put a piece of gold, a golden necklace, a golden chain around that. So then maybe you could understand a little more. It's not really being tied with this. This is on top. Maybe you could say it's less of an issue. But the common understanding is that not that it was, you have it tied on the bottom with that. And the common understanding is then somewhere else on the lulav, you have it tied with gold. And so the question is, how does is that for sure get you out of this problem of Baal Tosef? You're still adding on to another species to these species. And the way Rashi says it, Rashi says over here on the Mishnah, Rashi says that they would tie it b'minoi milmata l'shem mitzvahs eged. They would do that having in mind the mitzvah of tying. They would do that below with a real string of lulav, a lulav string, a lulav branch, a lulav leaf, and they would tie it kosher or with a hadas leaf or a hadas, and they would add golden things above it somewhere. And Vizel Lenoy Alma, Rashi says, this addition of the gold was only for beauty. So what Rashi seems to be saying is that even if you take another species, and even though that might be a problem under normal circumstances, let's say you didn't have in mind for the mitzvah, that could be a problem of Baal Tosef, even if you don't specifically have in mind for the mitzvah. But if you have in mind something different, like I'm just doing this for beauty, I'm not doing it at all, you're specifically having in mind not for the mitzvah, then maybe it works to get around the problem of Baal Tosef. Again, there's three types of kavanah. There's three types of intent. So, for example, Baal Tosef, you're adding on to the mitzvah. So if you add on having in mind, I'm doing a mitzvah with this addition, that's a major problem. Then you could say a middle case. I'm not having anything in mind. I'm adding on to the mitzvah, but I'm not having anything in mind. Just doing it with no intention, no clear intention. That could be a problem because mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah. Mitzvahs might not need kavanah, different opinions, and therefore could be a serious problem of Baal Tosef adding on to the mitzvahs because you're adding on them, and even though you're not specifically having in mind for the mitzvah, it could kick in anyway that it's mitzvah because you didn't, even if you don't have in mind, you don't need to have in mind. The mitzvah is fulfilled anyway, and if you're adding on to the mitzvah, it's the same thing that you're adding on to a mitzvah, Baal Tosef, even with no intention. But then you have a third way of kavanah, and that is where you have kavanah, your intention is the opposite. That's where you have kavanah for not mitzvah, for a different reason. I'm doing this for noise. I'm doing this for beauty. And when you're doing it for beauty, then that makes it that it's not Baal Tosef, it's not for the mitzvah. And because you're having in mind not for the mitzvah, that, according to some opinions, exempts you from the, and this seems the understanding that Rashi has over here, that you're doing it lenoi, that means that it's not for the mitzvah, and that makes it permissible, and you don't have a problem of Baal Tosef, and that's why they would get away with the gold, and it wasn't a problem. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. Now comes the Gemara. The Gemara says that we learned in the Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda holds that Rabbi Yehuda holds that you need to bind the lulav and the minoi in its min, right? That was what it says in the Mishnah. Ein oigden es halulav elo b'minoi. You need to bind it with its species. So comes along Rava, and Rava says, Amar Rava, afilu b'siv, afilu be'ikra de dikla. What does Rabbi Yehuda mean when he says that you need to use the min? Does he mean you have to use the actual lulav that you're going to shake with, or any part of the lulav tree is kosher enough? And here he says even div, some type of fiber that goes around the palm tree, and even ikra the dikla, the some type of even branches that you thin branches, somehow you're going to be able to bind around the lulav, and somehow you'll shave them down and use anything, even these branches from the what it means is maybe the trunk even. You'll somehow branches, I guess, would probably be more practical. Rashi over here says, "Ikra the dikla lach teich bimenu netzarim." You'll cut off the kolfam atrin legay. You'll cut off branches until you're able to use it. You'll peel them kolfam, shave them off until you're able to tie them. And And the main point is that Rabbi Yehuda holds you need it to be hadar. Not hadar. He doesn't hold of hadar. You need it to be mina. You need it to be it's min. You need it to be from the species. So this would be considered a species. That's the main reason. But Amar Rava, and Rava says, my taima de Rabbi Yehuda. What's the reason of Rabbi Yehuda that you need mina? You need it to be a species. Kasavar lulav tarech eged. He holds you need to tie the minim with. It's obligated to tie them, and it's part of the mitzvah. The imaisi mina achrina. If you're going to bring another type of species to tie them, hava chamisha mine. It will end up being five species instead of four. The lulav is supposed to be 4 species, and this will be a 5th species with the thing that you're tying with, and that would make it Baal Toisif. This would be a prohibition of adding on another type, another species, because he holds it needs to be eged, it needs to be tied. Therefore, it's going to be a problem if you do, because the tying is part of the mitzvah. So the Gemara says, Va'amar Rava, and Rava says, Mena aminallah. How do I know to say this? The siv, the ikra, the dikla, mina delulavahu, that the siv, the fiber around it, and the ikra, the dikla, this like branch of the palm tree, is the type of min of the lulav. How do I know that it's considered the Tanya? Because we learned in a brisa. Tasukos teishvu. They should dwell in sukkos, plural. Sukkah shall call davar divrei Reb Meir. You could use for schach a sukkah from anything. You know, certain rules. It has to grow from the ground, and it can't be a finished product. But you could use basically anything, any type of thing that grows from the ground, and it's not makabel tuma. That's kosher. Divrei Reb Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Ein sukkah naiheges ella ba'arba'a minem shebalulav." A sukkah could only be kosher if it's from the 4 species of the lulav. If you use anything else, it's not kosher. And the Hadin Noisein in logic says, Uma lulav she'ein noyeg baleilos kibiyamim. It's lulav that you doesn't apply at night like it does apply by day, meaning that there's no mitzvah to shake the lulav at night. It's only by day. Ein noyeg elabar bas minim. It only applies to the 4 minim of that you could only use the 4 minim. So then, sukkah shenai heges baleilos kibiyamim, a sukkah that does apply at night like the day, for sure should be limited. Einoi din shaloi tehei ella be'arbas minim. Shouldn't for sure it be limited to the 4 minim? If the sukkah has more chamor, we need it to be by night and by day, for sure it should be limited to the daled minim of the lulav. That's the only things that could be used for the schach. So Amru Loi, so they told Rabbi Yehuda, sounds like a nice kal v'chomer, an a priori argument, but they told him you can't always say kal v'chomer. Why? Because he says kol din, every logic, which in this case we're using this concept din, which means logic is a term of kal v'chomer. Every a priori argument, she'ata don chilasai lahachmer v'soifai lahakil einoi din. Every type of kal v'chomer that you try to learn something as a chumrah, as a way of being strict, but it ends up having a leniency, then that kal v'chomer is not acceptable as a method of learning, because it's going to end up being a leniency. Why? Because what's going to happen, now we turn the page, what's going to happen, 37a, everyone? What's going to happen if you don't have the Dalet Minim? So what are you going to use for your sukkah? Loi motza arbas haminim. If you didn't find the Dalet Minim, you're going to sit and do nothing. You're not going to fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah. You're missing out in the whole mitzvah because we're machmer. You have to have Dalet Minim you need to use for schach lulavim. You're going to put lulavs on top of your sukkah. The whole sukkah is going to be filled with lulavim. And what happens if they don't have any more lulavim left, and they don't have any hadassim and aravas left? What are you going to do? You're going to be stuck. You're yoshev uvatel. You'll say, "Oh, I'm exempt from the mitzvah." You're not going to do it. The Torah says the sukkah teishu shivas yamim. You have to dwell in the sukkah shel kol davar, and it says basukay in a plural, and we learn from there that sukkah, that the plural of sukkah means that you can make it from anything. The schach could be done from anything that grows from the ground, even if it's not from the Dalet Minim. And this is a proof that you should learn from the kal v'chomer that you need only the Dalet Minim, because you're going to get stuck in you're going to get stuck with certain situations where you don't have the option. You don't have any lulavim and hadassim and aravos to use for that. In addition to that, there's also the fact that the pasuk is plural, and it also, the pasuk, even if you want to tell me the kal v'chomer is good, you have a pasuk that says basukos. And not only that, another point, v'chein be'ezra omer, and also by Ezra it says, Se'u hahar v'haviu alei zayis. Go to the mountain and bring olive leaves, v'alei eis, shemen, and a parsimine. I'm not sure how to translate a parsimine. I'm sure some of you probably have a translation. The type of oil they make from it, but forget what it's translated as. But in the Hebrew, it's called a parsimine. And those alei eight shemen, the parsimine trees, and alei hadas, the hadas leaves, va'alei tamarim, and date leaves, va'alei eight zavos. And
Why?
What is the translation, Ezra?
Well, parsimon, I think, is persimmon.
Persimmon.
Yeah, is that it? Okay, persimmon. Okay, thank you. And va'alei eight zavos and lulav branches. And myrtle, excuse me. Hadas, alei eight zavos is the willows. Va'alei tamarim, va'alei eight zavos. And no, 1 second. Alei eight zavos is hadas. So we said hadas. Alei hadas. Alei hadas, right? We had this problem a while back. Alei hadas means a hadas shoita, and alei eight zavos is the myrtle. Yeah. Anaf eight zavos, if you remember, that's the wording for the hadas in the Torah. Anaf eight zavos. So here it says hadas and it says alei eight zavos. But hadas means the hadas shoita, and this is the Gemara we had way back. And the Anaf eight zavos is the alei eight zavos is the myrtle leaf. So you could take from all these things, Lasei Sukkah Kakosov, as it says, as we're supposed to, as it says in the Torah, that you're supposed to make Sukkahs, and don't learn from any kal v'chomer. You have, like the pasuk says, you could be masachech with anything. You shouldn't. He was telling them, don't make this kal v'chomer. At least that's one way of understanding the pasuk. that the pasuk is saying that the pasuk says la'asei sukkah is kakosov, right? This is the pasuk where it says take all these things. La'asei sukkah is kakosov. So do a sukkah like it says in the pasuk that it's acceptable, and don't make a kavachaymer. So don't limit yourself to only the daled minim. So you see what's not the daled minim over here. So number one, you have ale zayas, you have olive tree branches, leaves. You have these parsimon like persimmon leaves, and you have other types of things that aren't the daled minim, and you have the hadas shaita. The hadas shaita was that hadas that doesn't have three coming out of one juncture. So the Gemara says, so the rabbis brought some serious proof to their opinion over here, proving Rabbi Yehuda wrong with his kal v'chaymer. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Sava, Rabbi Yehuda answers the pasuk, and he says it's not such a proof. It's not such a proof. Rabbi Yehuda answers, and he says, Hani ledafanois, these are for the wall. That's what you could use other things for. But the ale hadas and ale tmarim and ale avais, the leaves of the hadas, tmarim, and avais, the leaves of the hadas shaita, the tamarim, the date palm, and the anafes avais, that's for schach. That would be kosher for schach. What we see here is that actually the hadas shaita is not approved. Hadas shaita, he holds, would actually be acceptable for schach, and the reason would be because the hadas shaita grows together with the regular hadassim, and it's considered the same min. It's just not kosher. It wouldn't be bal toisif, and they look the same, they grow the same, and therefore so basically so that's how Rabbi Yehuda understands that the you would be able to use for the schach, you would be able to use these other items, but the items that are kosher for schach, the additional things that it says you could use to build sukkahs and Sefer Ezra and Nehemiah, that it says you could use these to make sukkah, it's not about the wall. But the schach, that has to be from the daled minim. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Now, Rava wants to prove that the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda allows you to use ikra de dikla and the sieve, that the fiber and the leaves, the branches of the dekel of the palm tree are going to be kosher for the purpose of tying your lulav, utnan, and we learned in a Mishnah, mesakhin b'nesarim. It's called mimin halulav, according to that was what we started off. Mina aminallah. How do I know that afilu ikra de dikla, right? That's called the min. So here Rava is going to finish the proof that he started off with. So he also brings us to an earlier Gemara, Mishnah and Gemara that we learned. So what is the proof? So he says, if you remember going back, Utnan, and we learned in a Mishnah earlier, Mesachin b'nesarim, you're allowed to use nesarim, the board of wood, for schach. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. This is Rabbi Yehuda, the same Rabbi Yehuda. He allows you to use boards for schach. Now, So you're allowed to use boards for schach, and these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Now, they can be from the lulav itself, parts of. So obviously, if Rabbi Yehuda is allowing you to use other parts of the tree, that's considered good for the schach, that means it's also good to tie the lulav with. So alma siv ikra de dikla mina de lulavahu. So you see that if you're able to be masachech with them, in other words, the holds about using schach boards for schach, it can't be it can't be from the actual daled minim. It must be from the other parts of the tree, and therefore you see that's all called the min. It's all called the species of the tree, and therefore you would be able to use it as well to tie the lulav with the hadassim and the arabais, with the myrtle and the willow. So that's his proof. The Gemara says, you see from here that it is the min of the lulav. It is considered the species of the lulav. And the Gemara says, Shma mina, we hear from this, you've brought a proof. It's a good proof. So the Gemara then says, Umi Amar Rabbi Yehuda Arbas Minin in Midi Achrina Loi. Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold that you can only use for schach the daled minim and nothing else? V'hatanya, didn't we learn in a brisa, Tikcha b'nesarim shel erez, if you use boards of erez, cedar boards, sheyesh bahen arbat tvachim, that have 4 tvachim, divrei hakoil psul, everyone agrees is invalid. Ein bahen arbat tvachim, if it doesn't have 4 handbreadths wide, Reb Meir Paisel, Reb Yehuda Machshir. Meir says it's invalid, and Reb Yehuda says it's kosher. Umayda Reb Meir agrees. Shem yesh bein neser leneser kamale neser. If there is in between each of these boards amount of space that you could put one of these boards, that you could put shemaniach, so you could put the kosher stuff. Beinehan uksheira, you could put kosher stock in between them, and it's kosher. Now, the bottom line is that what we're seeing here is that we're talking about erez. Erez is cedar wood, and Rabbi Yehuda is talking about using it for schach, and that it could be kosher if it's less than 4 tefachim wide. So the Gemara answers that my erez, what is the erez that it's talking about? It's hadas. We're talking about hadas. To the Rabba bar Rav Huna, like Rabba bar Rav Huna says, Yama Rabba bar Rav Huna Amri Bei Rav, because Rabba bar Rav Huna said in the name that they said it in the Beis Medrash of Rav, that Asara Minei Rosen Haim, there's 10 types of erez, cedar trees. Shenemar, as it says, Etein bamidbar, erez, shita, vahadas, and it brings other ones. I think we mentioned it in the Zmiras on Shabbos. There's a Zmiras. One of the Zmiras says Barosh Tidhar. Right? That's in this pasuk. Barosh Tidhar. What's the whole pasuk? Let me.
Hadas shita Barosh Tidhar.
Hadas shita. Yeah, that's this. Right. So that's in this pasuk. The Reish Erez Shita Hadas 8 Shemen. Let me get the whole pasuk here. 1 second. It's in Yeshaya. Let me pull it up here. Etein bamidbar Erez Shita Hadas 8 Shemen Asim Ba'Rava B'Reish Tidhar Usa Asher Yachtav. Anyway.
Lamasir v'lanisar.
Which Zmiras is that in?
Dror Yikra.
Dror Yikra. Oh, Dror Yikra. Okay. Shkaya. So now we'll have to go and translate that, see how it's connected to that pasuk. But anyway, the bottom line is that there's what do we say? There's 10 types of erez, and 7 of them are mentioned over there. The rabbis add 3. So these are all types of erez, and erez, shita, hadas, eitz shemen, beroish, and tidhar, and ta'ashur, and then there's aloinim, almoinim, almoigim. These are added in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. The bottom line is that there's different types of erez, and it's interesting because they're all called erez, and they're all included in these. In other words, if a person sold an erez, he could actually include these. Someone mentioned to me this Shabbos, he says, the type of tree that we use for the that they use to build the Mishkan, he says was called shittim wood. And he says shittim wood, if we translate it as acacia wood, then he says it's a little problematic because the acacia trees do not grow straight up. And these trees need to have 15 feet of solid wood that goes straight, and he says that they can't figure out how it could stand and how it could, how you could even get wood like that so it seems that the translation that we have for Shita, not necessarily the correct translation. Here we see that it seems more like an erez, like maybe some type of cedar. It mentions it here, our Gemara, Shita. This is the Shita wood that they use for the Mishkan. Anyway, we're going to stop here. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day, to be continued tomorrow, Bez Hashem.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.